Welcome to Post Doom, regenerative conversations exploring overshoot grief, grounding, and gratitude. I'm your host, Michael Dowd. In this conversation, hour and a half conversation with Zachary Marlow, I wasn't originally planning it to be a post-doom conversation. I thought we were just two colleagues getting to know each other, and actually I thought he was interviewing me for sort of a future podcast that he would do. So you'll see I talk a lot more than I normally do, and I don't ask the normal questions that I do in a post-doom conversation. And occasionally you can hear Connie clinking in the kitchen doing stuff. But we ended up fortunately recording it, and we spiraled each other to some amazing places. Zachary is a big-hearted, brilliant young man, and I wanted to make sure that others got a chance to experience him as I did. And so do check out the description box for more information on the YouTube description box, and I think you'll enjoy this conversation. I sure did.
We're rolling. We're live.
Okay, great. Fabulous.
We're broadcasting out to millions of subscribers and listeners.
Are you serious? You've got millions?
I'm just kidding.
Oh.
We have probably around the same amount of people that you do, devoted, interested people we're the weird kids, We're not even like the band geeks. We're the weird kids.
Okay, good.
Well, so Michael, it's really great to connect with you. You're somebody that I've wanted to talk to for a while, and I just sense such a potent compassion and an exuberant acceptance and just so many other adjectives that could describe, your expression, because you are just such an intelligent person and such a caring person. And I love what you're saying and doing. And I love the community that you're building. It's like you build this support group, it really has the feeling of like an AA or something, for just dealing with really hard truths that you do in such a gentle way. And just wrestling with that thing that we're all going through, I was thinking about you the other day. I was driving through the suburbs where I grew up, the wasteland, really.
Where is this?
And this is Lawrenceville, Georgia.
Okay.
And
sure. I know that.
I saw the first homeless person that I'd ever seen there. After years of leaving, going really far away to try to get away from ultimately what I was trying to get away from, which was in myself. But I came back here, and I hadn't been here in years and years, and I saw everything was almost exactly the same, with just those few little signs of collapse. An old woman begging on the sidewalk where that would have been unimaginable when I was a child. And I was just thinking about the person I was when I lived there, in youth. And I was so isolated and alienated, and I had such a detachment from society, from everything that was going on around me. I had no interest in it. I had no connection to it. I had no relationship to it. And I remembered this video game that I started playing. It was called Fallout, which is a game about the end of the world. The world has ended, and people went into bunkers, and then they come out. And it's a very, thinking back on that is so strange to me, that it's this wish fulfillment that you wish the world was over, so that you could explore it anew, and right. that got me into this whole train of this apocalyptic fiction, because I had so little connection to the world around me, of people going around driving in their cars, shopping, getting jobs, becoming popular. All these things were just completely alien to me. So my escape from that was like to go pretend the world was over, and then I could wander around and, explore things and move through this world and see it with this different perspective. Because for me, the world was already over. And I dreamt that it would end, that all this, what I now know is capitalism, what I now know is money, what I now know is a form of culture, not life itself, that I had no connection to.
Right.
But I craved that. And that eventually brought me deeper down the rabbit hole, because I wanted more. I was like this, I wanted to see how other people imagined the end of the world. So I found my way to a beautiful book called The Road by Cormac McCarthy. One of the most beautiful, tender novels ever written, about a man and his child wandering through an even greater wasteland, a world of ash, and just remembering like the hem of his wife's dress at a theater, and just being haunted by, he says, from daydreams on the road there is no waking. He could remember everything of her save her scent. I remember this passage that I don't know why this stuck in my head, but he says he walked out into the cold gray light, and he saw for a brief moment the absolute truth of the universe. Darkness implacable, the blind dogs of the sun in their running, and somewhere 2 hunted animals trembling like ground foxes in their cover, borrowed world and borrowed time and borrowed eyes with which to sorrow it. And I'm like 15, 16 years old. Like imagining like the levels of alienation. To look
Yeah.
back on it is so
Yeah.
silly.
Yeah.
It's so silly that we allowed this construction of society to be so monstrous and alien that a young man, a young man in good health with legs and arms to move and see, and I now have a voice to speak, and that I had no connection to society.
Yeah.
Because the
Yeah.
way that we've arranged things in this, the world is already over. Spiritually, the world is dead. And it's a miracle that we have these connections, that we do still, that our hearts still beat, that they haven't just given up, because spiritually the world is already over.
Wow. Well, I think I get the heart, and I think I actually align with the heart and soul of what you're saying. Although the language, I trip up a little bit, only because so much of my work in the post-doom, no-gloom realm, I've had now 85 or 86 post-doom conversations. Everything's up on the post-doom website, of course, but then also creating my own, but also collecting from others what I consider and what they consider to be like post-doom scripture. Like, what are the most inspired writings, videos, text, blog posts, whatever. But what are the things that allow people to understand the nature of reality, to really get it? I mean, you used a couple of words together in your description of me that I thought, damn, that's good. I wrote it down. Exuberant acceptance. It's like, wow, because when we truly understand reality, including patterns that have been at work for thousands of years, then we don't have to fight against it and hate it and be bitter or whatever. And so I still find, even though I fully agree that things are collapsing, it's unstoppable, that things are always evolving in terms of adapting to reality. But I no longer interpret evolution the way that I did for probably 12 years at least, which was a more human-centered, unidirectional sort of things are getting better and better and more complex and more consciousness. And I was evangelistic about that. In fact, my second book, Thank God for Evolution, has that perspective at the heart of it, which I now completely reject. But even though my book was endorsed by 6 Nobel Prize winning scientists and like 120 religious scholars from all over the spectrum, I don't recommend my book because it's like 10%. 90% of it's still great, but the 10% that's hopium, what I would now call hopium, it's like saying, oh, here, have this gourmet meal. There's only 10% fentanyl in it, but the rest of it's really good. It's like, so, but
I just want to say real quick. Oh, sorry. When you said the simplicity and the complexity, I was just remembering this line that I heard Stan Rushworth say last night about how the complexity of our society is illusory, because things are actually much simpler now, because it's all about like acquisition and fear and power and profit and accumulation. Whereas he talks about the ancient mentality, the indigenous mentality, is much more complex and rich, because their job is to be in relationship with all of reality, with time and space and nature and each other, and to tend all these relationships, this fabric of reality that is so much more complex and brilliant than what we have been reduced to today. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
He brings, I mean, Stan Rushworth is one of my absolute heroes in terms of indigenous, kin-centric, life-centered scholars, hearts, teachers, amazing. And so I agree with him in that. We have in the industrial world, in the anthropocentric world, in the human-centered rather than life-centered or kin-centric world, yes, the way that we define complexity is very narrow and very anthropocentric, very hubristic.
Parasitic even.
Yeah, exactly. Very parasitic. And so, but the one thing that the language that I might take issue with, or at least interpret differently than what you articulated a few minutes ago, was that I don't find that the world is spiritually dead. I find that the biosphere and other life forms, everything's dying. I mean, we're the complexity, biological complexity of the last 65 million years is in a state of decline, is in a state of collapse, is in a state of most likely a 6th mass extinction that will include us and most mammals and most trees and most insects and most vertebrates. So clearly that form of complexity, that biological richness and fecundity is collapsing. And yet, for those of us who have the eyes to see and ears to hear, there is a communion, and Stan Rushworth is one of the greatest teachers, as Robin Wall Kimmer and so many other indigenous leaders are these days, guides to the most intimate, personal, respectful, reverential, a reciprocal relationship possible with the body of life and with the existing life forms. I love the phrase, I think it's Daniel Wildcat, who said, we're surrounded by relatives, not resources. And so it is still possible in these dying times, in this time of great collapse, this time of great consequences of our millennia of anthropocentrism. I still find that it's a very rich time for a deep, intimate communion, a spiritually vital relationship with life, even in its decline, even if in its collapse. And that's what I call post-doom, no gloom.
So I feel that I agree completely. I mean, I perhaps misspoke when I said the world is spiritually dead. I mean, I should say the human-made environment,
Oh yeah,
the culture
yes.
that we identify with,
Yes.
you know,
I'm
big
with you
business,
completely.
progress,
Yes. I'm with you
success. All our
Yes.
measures of success are measures of death, really.
Bankrupt.
And, you know, you go
Completely. Yes.
GDP, which is a measure of, you know, exploitation and resource use and how much shit we're burning into the air.
Right.
And, you know, these are our measures of success. These are our high scores on the video game that we're playing, which is this false, you know, this this monstrous algorithmic video game, this overlord that we call the market, that 1% of the population plays this game, and they're feeding all life into it like tokens.
Yeah.
And just banging the machine, and the score's going up and the number gets higher, and we say we're doing better when really we're doing worse and worse.
Yeah, and you really put your finger on it there. I mean, I think it's our measure. When I think about what are the fundamental differences, like the truly ground level differences between healthy, truly sustainable cultures, those that live in a mutually enhancing, respectful, reverential relationship to the body of life as our biophysical creator, sustainer, and end, and anthropocentric, ecocidal, city-based, extractive and exploitative cultures. What are the differences? Well, one of them, it seems to me, is how we relate to our biophysical creator, sustainer, and end. That is the living world, Gaia, whatever you want to call. I mean, I actually, as I think you know, I spell God these days, G, Earth emoji, D, because any concept of the divine that doesn't include our living biophysical creator, sustainer, and end, the cosmos, the biosphere, is an inadequate and indeed ecocidal notion of the divine. And so,
I just want to. Oh, yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, so how do we be with all of that from a big-hearted place of compassion and generosity, where we don't close off our heart, so we can still feel the grief, we can still feel the sadness, and yet what we're most present to on a day-by-day, moment-by-moment basis is the fucking awe of, oh my God, I still get to eat a meal. I still get to go grocery shopping. That won't happen much longer, probably. You know, I can still put gas in the car. The hordes have not come. You know, my family, because I'm living somewhat privileged in that where I'm living now, we don't have to struggle yet for our food or our shelter, or, you know, we're not worried about our safety yet, as many people around the world are that are further along in collapse. So part of what I see my role is in this whole post-doom, no gloom realm is to help people, understand reality so they can get away from the confusion to clarity, like, oh, of course. So they understand collapse and inevitability. And the blame game can evaporate, where they can no longer just blame the capitalists, blame the Republicans, blame the boomers, blame whoever, because there's a lot of blameworthy stuff. And yet when you realize these are millennia old patterns of anthropocentrism, human-centeredness, that are ecocidal, then it's like, okay, what good does it do to continue playing that blame game? And then really find, where does love motivate you and I and all the people that we know and love? Where does love motivate us to be in action in ways that we can make a difference? Because just because we can't save everything doesn't mean there's not a hell of a lot of really great stuff we can do.
I was going to say a minute ago that I loved so much. You said this as an aside in one of your videos. this people debating like, is there a God, is there no God? It's just like absurd that like a God is reality, you know, that
Yes.
what did you say? Can you rephrase that?
Well,
It was so
yeah, I mean,
powerful.
the theism versus atheism debate I see as a form of collective insanity, because you've got thousands, maybe millions of people debating whether or not God is real or whether or not God exists, when the one real God, namely reality, personified or not, we've been living out of right relationship to, and we're now already beginning to experience consequences of biblical proportion. So I see theists and atheists as in a neck and neck race to see which one can contribute to the demise of the biosphere more effectively. The biosphere is God. The biosphere is divine. Let's just say divine. The cosmos is divine. This is our creator, sustainer, and end, our biophysical and living creator, sustainer, and end. But if we have a concept of God as a supernatural, otherworldly entity, and then we think of believers as people who believe in that being, and atheists as those who discount that being, well, then you've got a situation where your very definition of God is causing you, whether you're religious or secular, to treat the biosphere as an it to be exploited rather than a thou to be honored. It's sort of really where the living world, our creator, sustainer, and end, is treated as a larder and a toilet rather than a divine being. Crazy. It's just crazy.
I laugh when I hear you talk, and I kind of cracked up a minute ago. You were just like, oh yeah, the end of everything. I just kind of had to crack up, and it's like, I was thinking about this the other day too, that like that apocalyptic fiction, you know, and that doomed beautiful poetry of like Cormac McCarthy and just the stuff that I was reading at that period and still find great beauty in. It's like the itch that the angsty person feels when they hear like metal music, when they live in this suppressed, buttoned down, like contradictorily, puritanically religious and also completely godless world,
Yes,
like
exactly.
unspiritual existence, that there's like this great like, oh yeah, like when you hear like metal and Black Sabbath and someone screaming, like I know so many people growing up that listen to just like in their earbuds walking around school, they just hear like, you know, it's like this crazy, like just there's a release that you feel when you're suppressed, when the truth is not told for a long time, and you hear it spoken. There is a familiarity and a release and like a satisfaction. So it's great to find, you know, truth spoken to power in the time of great lies. That I think ultimately what is killing the world is ignorance, is you know, ignorance and denial of the God and everything, of this obvious perfection of nature and the holism and this and the synchronicity and I'm losing my words here. I'm getting all teared up thinking about my creator and creation, that we are a part of this thing, you know, that we are all life, and that the absurdity of anthropocentrism, as you call it, I would use different language for that, but the anthropocentric perspective is that it is ultimately cannibalistic and parasitic to nature, to
And we
us,
think it's
to us,
all
to
about
humans.
us. Right, exactly.
But
We think it's all about us.
it's even bad for us, that the measures of health in this production obsessive society are destroyed, and inequality itself is one of the greatest detriments to health, that you can't have a healthy society when you're pulled between these two extremes, and there's this tension between peoples, there's this fear and isolation and anger and competition.
Right. I'm with you 100%. And you can't have healthy humans in a sick and dying world. That's the thing. Most of us, for the last many hundreds of years, probably thousands of years in many cases, don't understand the nested nature of reality, that we are made up of smaller, creative, divine, intelligent creatures like our microbiome, for example, that we don't exist without. And we are part of and dependent upon larger, creative, intelligent, divine beings like trees and plankton and all other creatures and everything else. And so I call that everything that needs to exist for us to exist. Like those aspects of our inner reality and those aspects of our outer reality that we don't exist without. I call that primary reality. And whether you use divine language like God or the goddess or Gaia for that, or whether you use secular language, it doesn't really matter. But what does matter is whether we have what our relationship. Do we treat primary reality as primary, or do we treat primary reality as secondary, that we're primary? And that hubris, that anthropocentric, I love the ancient Greek definition of hubris, is the overweening pride of the doomed. And that's what human-centeredness does. That's why one of my favorite books is a book written by an indigenous elder and scholar called Columbus and Other Cannibals by Jack Forbes. And it's all about what he calls wetiko, which is this sickness of the mind, this virus of the mind, which is what anthropocentrism is. And it's really one of his essays you can really get in like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. I've recorded it. That was like a summary of his book, Columbus and Other Cannibals, Jack Forbes. There's an essay called Why Are People Evil? And it's just a little introduction to this notion of wetiko, this virus of the mind that causes us to think it's all about us. And so then we use other people, we use the living world, and as Thomas Berry used to make the point, when you say, you've used me, I mean, and yet that's the way we treat our biophysical living creator, sustainer, and end. So at any rate, I feel grateful that there are people your age, because you're considerably younger than I am, who have a common heart, a common passion, and a desire to communicate with and connect with others of other generations and perspectives and backgrounds, because I think we do share a common heart, a common set of values and priorities and commitments. And certainly I find that some of the voices that I find to be the most faithful and countable are the voices of people like Stan Rushworth and Robin Wall Kimmerer and many other indigenous leaders, because those places where biodiversity and the land and the water and the quality of the soil are being protected, or at least attempted to be protected most fiercely, are almost always being led by indigenous resistance. And so, they don't want us white folk to just say, oh, isn't that great? No, they want us to do our own resistance of that, because even if 90% or 80% or 60%, but some large percent of the biological diversity collapses and goes extinct in the next 20 or 30 years or 40 years, which is absolutely possible, perhaps even likely, still the soil that you build in your backyard could be what keeps some organisms, some worms, some microbes alive for millions of more years. We can't predict what our pro-future, pro-life, in the sense of pro-biology, actions can be. And that's why I'm always encouraging people to follow their hearts and do anything you possibly can to participate with and contribute to the regenerative, restorative dynamics of this incredible living divine planet.
There's so much that I just totally reverberate with in when you speak, and yeah, I feel that harmony of values tremendously. I've read that book, or at least a good portion of it, Columbus and the Cannibals, and the Wetiko is a very powerful way to understand what I would call capitalism. And I don't see capitalism as something that just started a few hundred years ago. I see it as something birthed when the first debt was inscribed in the first stone tablet, to basically create a surplus that was hoarded by peoples in walled cities. It's interesting to think about that the movements for peace and religions and spiritual schools and philosophical schools in our history arose, as the great David Graeber pointed out, parallel to both imperial conquest and money and markets, which all arose parallel. And so you have these responses to this explosion of that impulse that Peter Joseph calls the root socioeconomic orientation. Which is the basically the valuation and scarcity and hierarchical dominance, which propels itself into this colossus, this thing, that gains speed and that gains power, and it's creating like a snowball going down a hill, that the reaction and the cycle of dominance that gains its greatest power not in the sword, but in the loaf of bread, and saying, I have this, I control the resources, I control wealth, and you need to work for me. So you have the labor market coming into that as well, and slavery as well. And it's all in this incredibly insecure dynamic of accumulation, domination, and the psychology of domination is one of pure insecurity. So to dominate other people, you do it out of this fear that they're going to dominate you first. It's always like, I think I'm thinking about George Bush. What was that thing he said? Shock and awe. He's talking about, you know, what was it? They went out looking for weapons of mass destruction and all this bullshit, because I'm kind of losing my speed here, but essentially there's this reactive cycle that has developed over thousands of years into what we now call capitalism, into what we now call industrial civilization. And the great Murray Bookchin made a point in a great essay called Social Ecology versus Deep Ecology, I think.
Yeah, I've read that a couple times.
He's saying that a lot of people will just lump industrial civilization and extractivism and all these things into this sort of metaphorical construct, when in reality we just call it capitalism, because it's a very specific form of accumulation and dominance that has gained momentum and mass through this systematic process. And I think that of all the things that I agree with in what you have to say, I think one of the biggest ones that I don't agree with fundamentally is that technology is in and of itself a singular cause of our destruction. And I think there's certain technologies that most technologies will become, in the ethos of that Wedico, of that capitalistic market dominance hierarchy, will become a weapon. Anything, even bread, even ways of making food, ways of generating abundance, even things that I would consider of beneficial ability, like the ability to generate clean energy. Mm-hmm. In this market-based paradigm that seeks endless growth at all cost, that is fundamentally predicated on increasing cyclical consumption. Like I walked through Walmart the other day because I had to find the dumbest little headphone adapter. I was so mad. And I was just walking through this graveyard, and I saw in every piece of clothing hanging on a wall a dead bird or a lizard that no longer exists, or and just thinking about the absurdity of the total lack of economy done in the name of economy, that we produce quintillions of objects, not for any human demand or drive that humans have, but to turn it into this consolidated power and wealth and influence to drive this economic cycle. So I would say that ultimately the technology that is really destroying us is a social technology that is, coagulated into money.
Yeah, let me lean into that a little bit, because I find myself too, as I began exploring the links you gave me and that sort of thing, I found myself just agreeing with the vast majority, but there were a few things I wanted to lean into that I think we either language differently or hold differently. And one of them, as you said, for me, I see 5 main causes and drivers of collapse and ecocide. That these things are at the heart of the collapse of all 80 or 90 or 100 civilizations that we know of that have gone through the boom and bust, rise and fall, progress, regress, collapse process over the last 6,000-7,000 years. And they are the things driving the collapse of industrial civilization and capitalism. And so these 5 I see as, first, anthropocentrism, or human-centeredness, which is really the root of the others, because it's our human-centered religions. It's our human-centered understanding of economics, rather than a nature or life-centered understanding of economics, which is basically ecology. Ecology is the economic system of Gaia, of God, of G, Earth, emoji, D. And so if we don't mimic our economic system on the economic system of the natural world, the living systems, ecology, basically. When I speak to religious people, I say, if ecology isn't the heart of your theology is leading us to hell, leading us to ecocide. So the first is anthropocentrism, and that's at the heart of all monetary system, whether you call it capitalism or whether you call it whatever, but any economic system that treats the living world, our biophysical creator, sustainer, and end, as a larder in a toilet, is going to self-destruct, because it monetizes the living world. And we are deceived at that point of imagining that A, we can control it, and that B, that it's kind of like the difference between the land belongs to us, unsustainable, ecocidal, or we belong to the land. That sense of reciprocity and humility. So the first is anthropocentrism. The others are civilization, progress, science and technology, human-centered science and technology, not life-centered knowledge and life-centered technology that mimics nature, and capitalism, or, as I said, any money system, any monetary system, any system of trade and exchange that treats God, the living world, as a larder in a toilet. And so I see that technology that's anthropocentric, and you can go back as far as fire and spears and spear chuckers. I mean, you can look at the whole history of technology, human-centered technology, and it always creates more problems. That is technology that doesn't mimic nature's technology that doesn't become food for other creatures at its end. Technology that benefits us but doesn't benefit other creatures always creates more problems for humans and other creatures, and it does it over time. So that's what I mean when I point to human-centered knowledge. I mean, this is the thing. We're so full of ourselves that we think that knowledge, look at what this Hubble Space Telescope and the James Webb and all of our technology has given us such profound understanding of reality. We come to understand reality. But religion has not been playing its corresponding role, because only if religion is doing its job is there an institution or an aspect of society that helps us to not understand reality, but relate to reality. And if we don't relate in a healthy way to reality, then our knowledge can fucking kill us. And that's what nuclear technology and all this other stuff that abuses. It's almost like we have industrial scale abuse and rape of the living world because of our knowledge. So that's why
it's the value system. And that's John McMurtry's term of value system disorder. That where we place value, and I think that the order of operations there isn't that this disorder doesn't emanate from a cultural dysfunction. It comes from an economic and scarcity-driven drive to.
But hang on a second. Culture precedes economics, not vice versa. A culture, any economic system is part of a cultural worldview. It's part of a cultural way of being. For example, the economic system in genuinely sustainable cultures like the Kogi Indians, for example, they even have a city-based sustainable culture that is based on ecological principles. But their systems of trade and exchange are within that. And so I don't see economics as more foundational than cultural. It's a subset of culture.
So here's what I mean by that. Essentially, it's not like people come up with some economic paradigm and then map it onto whatever they're doing. I'm saying that basically the need for to meet life's needs and the relationship that one has to scarcity. Mm-hmm. Like I think about the bonobos and the chimpanzees. Mm-hmm, and the bonobos live in an abundant environment. They have plenty of things, all the things that they need abundantly, and they don't dominate each other. They have a lot of sex. They hang out. They eat fruit. It's great. And then you have the chimps, which are almost genetically identical, and they're literally like separated by like one river. They're on the other side of the tracks, so to speak, evolutionarily. Right. And they live in a scarce, less resource abundant or relationship abundant, if you want to.
No, I'm with you.
And they dominate each other, and they break each other's balls off, and they rape each other, and they have this. I would consider that an economic system because it's based upon their relationship to a scarcity. And so
that's interesting. Okay, so given your definition, and this may go back to Buchin and others, okay, so let me back off then and say that given the way you're languaging and others clearly.
Real quick, I was just going to say, I was thinking about this last night. It literally made me I was trying to go to bed. I was listening to one of your talks, and I just laughed out loud. And it was just that the technology that's really fucked us over is language.
Yes, absolutely. Symbolic language. I'm totally with you on that.
And the Phoenician alphabet especially was a really bad move.
No, I'm with
because
you.
It's not pictorial. It's totally squiggles. So we have this basis of understanding reality that's based in language that's not based on anything real. There's no physical reference to it. So we're conditioned from childhood to accept absurdities.
Yes, no, exactly. I'm so glad you brought that up, Zachary, because a lot of people, language is kind of like the water we swim in. We don't pay attention to it because it's the water we swim in. And yet, as two of the colleagues that I hold in highest esteem, both have a significant mentor in the same person that is one of my most significant intellectual mentors, and that's Walter Ong. Walter Ong was the great Jesuit scholar that specialized in orality and literacy and the difference between oral consciousness and literate consciousness. And Paul Kingsnorth from the Dark Mountain Project, and Dave Abram, who's written some amazing books, The Deep Ecologist, both of them have the same understanding that basically that English is the language of ecocide. And even speech itself, I mean, our language itself, it can, and there certainly are many examples of indigenous cultures that have a language, that the language itself facilitates right relationship to reality. But certainly, as you say, alphabetical language, and there are many forms of language that treat the living world as it, as noun, and that almost force us, when we simply use that language, to behave in ecocidal ways. And so, glad you brought that up.
English is basically a business language that's a mishmash of all these other languages. It's funny. I was staying with all these Russian people that I met on Couchsurfer in my monkish random life of interdependence on other people, because I don't have that stuff we call money that lets you not need other people.
Right, exactly.
And they were trying to learn English, and they kept coming up to me and being like, there, 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 just like all the different spellings, and they were just so confused. And I just remember they got to this word. It was the word though with the GHT, and they looked at it and they were just like, what? Why? They were so that language is English. The English language is this mishmash of French and German and this and that, you know, a word here and a word there and the structure here, because it's based on this culture of trade, of this, you know, spreading, you know, trade-based society that has come to dominate everything as, you know, the end all be all of existence, that you know, business is life.
Yes, and there's a reason that we don't know of any literate cultures that weren't ecocidal, that didn't ultimately do themselves in through ecological overshoot. Or, yeah, I mean, there's a few that, like a volcano, wiped them out. But by and large, literate cultures, literacy itself forces the human mind to relate to the living world as object rather than, as Thomas Berry says, the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. And yet literacy itself almost forces us to relate to the living world as a series of objects.
Well, I as a great lover of language, and to get back to Cormac McCarthy, like when I read his writing and poetry, I look up at the world with a greater appreciation for life. The ways that he speaks, the ways that he uses that language. So language to me has been the greatest vehicle to love life and to love the God in everything. And so I think about language at its foundational basis in like cuneiform is about accounting, you know. The first written, you know, documents are about accounting, and that brings back to that, you know, economics as the foundational point of this degeneration that we've had. And essentially that's one of the larger points to the movement that we're trying to get off the ground, and the consciousness that we're trying to get people to understand, is that the overshoot that we're seeing in the world today, I do not see it as an inherent consequence of humans organizing themselves into complex forms. I would see it as a consequence of, in our case, especially right now, I can't go deep into the history of all these other systems that have gone before, but our current system and our current predicament is that on the track that we're on, which is moving very fast and an exponential speed forward, demands more theft of life and destruction, to turn it into plastic, to turn it into objects that are used once and then thrown away. Because, like, I was at a friend's house the other day at a dinner, and this is old friends that I hadn't seen in probably a decade. And I didn't know really where they were in their awareness. And my experience is of like a traveling prophet, like getting people to question everything that they've experienced and, you know, help them see that there's this deeper story underneath all of that. But it was kind of at the end of the night, I was trying to feel out like where they are, because it just seemed like we were in a very normal suburban environment. I didn't really want to be like, hey, this is all bullshit, you know, like this is all, the world is ending, you know. And so there was this refrigerator that had this like mechanism for the water filter that like shot out instead of coming down. So everybody kept getting sprayed with it, and it became a big joke. And so I was like, I just kind of, at the last like leg of a little dinner, whenever after dessert and everything, I pointed that out, and he said, oh yeah, that thing is terrible. And I said, well, you know why it's bad? It's because of planned obsolescence, because there's no incentive in this system to make it right the first time. It's actually a feature that your fridge sucks enough that you will buy another one. This extremely resource intensive, full of all these metals and magnets and, you know, all this material that is ripped out of the earth, that has to have a turnover rate that is exponential. And so if we want to really approach changing our relationship to our world, we need to move away from that. And it is amazing how many activists are completely resistant to thinking about that. How
Yeah,
many
that
progressives and all these people that they won't think about it. They won't
yeah.
question it.
Let me lean into that with you, because you've now mentioned what I would, at least on a somewhat superficial study of where you're coming from and what's really most important to you and all, where I think I would lean into in terms of our biggest difference is that you still seem to think, and correct me if I'm wrong, you still seem to think that certain things are possible in terms of consciousness and we, what I call the ecocidal hubris of the almighty we, that we can still make changes that I think are so far beyond, literally thousands of years beyond, that we could have made those changes maybe a few hundred or a few thousand years ago, but it's no longer possible. So it seems to me that if I were to lean into where I think we differ most, because that's the juicy stuff, is it seems to me that there are at least a half a dozen tipping points, thresholds that are not, we're not at risk of passing them. They're not in front of us. We ran over that dog 20 or 30 years ago. And these are tipping points that are now already in unstoppable runaway, rapidly accelerating out of our control mode. And one of them is the burning of the forests. All the forests of the world, virtually all the major forests of the world, will be burning in the next 20 to 50 years, regardless of anything we do. So we can't stop that no matter what. If every human being went extinct tonight in our sleep, so there were no emissions, we reduced emissions to zero tomorrow, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide would continue to burn just from the great conflagration of forests that's already unstoppable, and the great release of methane from permafrost and from the forests and elsewhere, the tropical wetlands. So that's one thing. Another is the loss of the oceans, that basically we're going to lose all the ice of the world. It's unstoppable. Humans, there's nothing we can do to stop that. And I don't see us being able to make any large-scale shift in economics or politics or governance or anything prior to us hitting the wall completely. And that whether there are any human beings at all 20 years from now, which there might not be, or there may be 7,000 pockets of several hundred humans in different isolated outposts of humanity, but it's not likely to be more than that. I mean, I think we're already in that runaway mode of the loss of the forest, loss of the oceans, the acidification and the deoxygenation of the oceans. And so we're looking at so many tipping points that debating or strategizing, like how can we have this happen or how can we get people to do that, it seems to me to be completely missing the point. It's almost like if you've got a terminal diagnosis and you're going to die in the next 2 to 10 years, no doubt, and you're debating about retirement, or you're debating about what gave you the cancer that's going to kill you. It's like, who the fuck cares what gave it to you? You got it. Now, how do you live from now on? So I just would love to lean into any of that with you.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was, in listening to your work, that was really the big one that I disagree with, or would hope to expand the discussion along that big we. But first, I want to just say on the cancer thing, I think about when you say that a friend of mine that got a terminal cancer diagnosis, and her response was, I don't know how this happened. It's through a miracle of awareness and synchronicity. She learned of a substance, a ritual called ayahuasca that I'm sure you're familiar with.
Very familiar with it, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And she went on a journey, an adventure across the world into the jungle to sit with indigenous shamans, and she healed herself through that and other lifestyle changes and things that. So there isn't a binary of, except, some kind of chemotherapy treatment, which I would consider like, just put it all on technology, nuke it, radiation, like that's not gonna, that could kill you, could do more harm than good. But I think there is this third option, this third way that, and I think about Stan Rushworth saying this beautiful thing. I couldn't find the clip last night, but I wanted to find it so I could send it to you. But he basically said this assurance that we are doomed, that this is it, that it's over. He said that's the same arrogance that got us into this position to begin with. That's the white man's certainty.
I could not possibly disagree more. There's just, and I get that that's going to be the perspective of indigenous leaders. It's going to be the perspective of anybody who's still holding out for what I would call hopium. And I define hopium very specifically, very clearly, very deliberately, as here's my definitions of hopium. It's 5 definitions. A comforting vision of the future that requires breaking the laws of physics, biology, or ecology. It requires that. Addiction to false, literally impossible hopes. 3, irrational or unwarranted optimism that promises short term relief but delivers crushing disappointment and despair when reality inevitably bites. Any hope that leads us to put off or not prioritize what matters most individually in terms of my relationships, my family, my friends, my neighbors, and collectively. If we hope, if millions of people believe like you do, we're not going to take the spent fuel rods out of the swimming pools. We're going to think that things can continue, that transformation is possible, that the evolution of consciousness can still make the difference. And as long as we believe that, we're not going to accept the fact, in my opinion, this is my, you can call it arrogant if you want, but that we're going to experience tons of electric failures and tsunamis and power grid failures, and we're going to have dozens, maybe hundreds of nuclear meltdowns unless we accept civilization's fucked. There's no stopping that. And we need to get the spent fuel rods out of the swimming pools ASAP.
So first of all, I don't.
Well, let me finish.
Oh,
well, my last definition of hopium is that so any hope that leads us to put off what's most important collectively and individually, and then finally, believing that the climate crisis can be fixed or solved by doubling down on the very things causing ecocide. And that's the thing that so many people, that what they believe can possibly transform things, what they think is possible in terms of consciousness transformation, political transformation, economic transformation at any level, would literally require and depend upon the very causes of ecocide going into the future. So that's why I'm so passionate about people getting off of hopium. Hope is great. There's no problem with hope, unless you're hoping in stuff that's going to cause us to actually do geological scale evil by not having as few nuclear meltdowns as possible, by not moving other species, because we know that we're fucked and that there's no stopping at least 90% of mammals, or let's say 80% of mammals, going out in the next several decades, including humans. If we don't accept the inevitability of that, then we're going to still be hoping for some kind of transformation that I hoped for in my 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. But since understanding abrupt climate change, like 10,000 years of climate change in half a human lifetime, I now see those very things that I was hoping for, including consciousness transformation, including evolution continuing. Because I think my understanding of evolution for 12 years was utterly diluted. It was thinking of evolution as progressive, and it's not. It's adapting. So anyway, I got a chance to I want to lean into you in this stuff because I'm a bow of respect to anything you want to believe and hope for or be passionate about. But I have some real question about the value of, say, for example, siding with Stan Rushworth in what you just quoted me, because I think it's not uncertain. The idea that things are uncertain, that we just don't know, that is horseshit. We know that the sun is going to continue to do its thing, the earth is going to continue to do its thing, and it would be false humility to propose no, that's not going to be the case. And the idea that any mammal our size can survive a 4 or 5 or 6 degrees Celsius rise is complete lunacy, in my opinion.
So I just want to say, first of all, I don't think you're arrogant at all. I think you're very humble.
Well, I do. I think sometimes I am, but I'm also passionate, and I hope that I at least have the presence of mind to be able to step back and say, yeah, the way I just said that was pretty arrogant, but nonetheless, I'm passionate about it.
What I have to say to that is basically yes, and I think basically almost everything you just said is quite true. I think that the final conclusion that there is a certain reality that's unfolding, I know that if we continue on this path of economic growth and development and business as usual and politics as we know it, every single institution and mechanism for bringing about change, and I'm very close to the renewable energy industry. My father it's his baby. He's been in it for decades, and I'm very cynical about their development, their path. But I'm extremely optimistic in the contingency of the wild and crazy personal transformation that is possible for me, because I think about and look at the person that I was, the mess of reactions and the heap of discontentment and misanthropy, and even in my reaction against the system that I hated so much, I was just being it. And so I see myself today, after many journeys, after many heartbreaks, after many calamities, because that's really what it takes.
Yeah.
You know, for to look into the whirlwind, to look into the hurricane and see the face of God, you know, to really see that. And we are certainly, without any margin of error, going to see horrible things very soon, and are seeing them today. But my hope in that, and this has been a very profound shift in my entire attitude, and it is not a rational belief.
Yeah.
It is entirely irrational and mystical,
Yeah.
and comes
I get it.
through an intuition that has led me successfully through this world, without money, into the heart of darkness, into dangerous places, and against all the odds, that I have lived this life that, following that intuition and that synchronicity, has not proven me wrong yet. And so I trust it. That's what I put my trust in.
That's great, and I'm a huge bow of respect to that.
But I just wanted to keep expanding on that. That I believe in people. I believe in the essential human being underneath all this. And you and I and all of us, we still incubate and carry forth, you know, the seeds of destruction. Actually, that reminds me of this little poem that I'd like to read at some point in this little talk later.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
But I do see people every day. The shift that occurred, and a lot of this came from this period of working on this film, living. I had this mountaintop revelation. Oh my God, the world is ending. You know, a very mystical, spiritual thing that was like, the world is ending, society's collapsing. It was a biblical moment, and you have to go and warn them. You have to warn them that this is going to happen. It's going to happen. And so I did all this crazy ritual and prayer and magic and angels and yoga and all of it. And I had this vision. I was going through these cardinal directions and doing all these mantras, and I stopped at south. South is like lust and fire and desire. And I like felt this voice speak out of me, and it said, like, you know, lust and desire and growth are the wheels that move this world. And, you know, without them, there would be no stasis. All life would have not moved past a single cell. And I like gravitated toward the campfire, and it was like, where is the source of lust and desire in the world? It was like Los Angeles. It was just like, you have to go to Los Angeles and make a movie warning people. And I did it. And the next day I'm like leaving the mountain, and I came back into cell service, and a great friend that I just met messaged me, said, come to Los Angeles. We're going to make a movie. And it was just like, oh God, okay, all right, here it is. We're going, it's off. And so I followed this journey, and it led me to the desert anarchist communities, and to living in my truck on the sidewalk, and to staring into the homeless crisis in Los Angeles as the face of our ecological crisis that we cannot even identify and relate to our own species.
Right.
And through this journey, this conflict with society, with myself, there was a lot of symbols recurring, and the Bhagavad Gita was one of them. And there's a passage in that book that says something like, if you can experience pleasure as pain, then you are aligned with me, you know, the essential self that it exudes, that lives in all things. And so I used to get really dark and down about hearing news that children can no longer go outside in the rain and put their tongues out to catch drops safely.
Right.
That our oceans are poisoned, that there are bombs of carbon and methane frozen in the permafrost. And if they melt, if we melt down to that point, they will explode into the air, and years worth of emissions cumulatively will be released. I used to hear those things and despair. And now I hear those things, and I get a very strange sense of optimism, because it means that people will hear that and experience that, and their illusion, which is really what we're stuck in. We're trapped in a belief system of a video game, of a delusion, of a narrative that is completely false and disconnected from reality, and godless in the truest sense. And that the experience of these calamities happening are what is going to bring about a greater shift in consciousness than has ever been happened. And when I look at old civilizations passing, when I look at the Bronze Age collapse and things like that, and say, oh, we've been through this before. But we've never been through this before. We've never been through a totally global crisis that we understand on this level, that we have the science, the knowledge, the education, the understanding, and the prophecy all coming together to harmonize all over the world, that humanity has a common predicament that affects every single one of us. Every single life on this planet is affected by this. And I do not think that nature itself, which is a conscious entity, would allow such a thing to happen in vain. And perhaps I'm wrong. I'm willing to accept that. But just real quick, I will go down, even in the face of the nuclear inferno. I will say we can grow from this. This is finally it. Because to get back to the beginning of our little talk, talking about wishing for the end of the world. I didn't wish for the end of the world. I didn't wish for billions of people to die, but I wish for this dominance hierarchy cycle, for this capitalistic, accumulative, human-centric belief system and structure that we have constructed for ourselves against nature. I want it to die. It has to die. And I'm joyous about bringing about its end, because there is no other way we will kick this bullshit habit.
Well, I don't share your anger anymore, but I share so much of what you just shared. And my own sense is that what I wish for, what I desire, because frankly, I don't think that there's virtually anything that we can do to speed up the demise. I don't think there's anything we can do to slow down the demise. I don't think there's anything that we can do to reverse it or whatever. So whatever's going to unfold in the coming decade or two, which in my opinion is probably at least an 80% chance it's going to wipe out virtually all complex life bigger than this that can get down into a burrow and survive under the ground for a while. But in any event, whatever happens, life will continue, evolution will continue, Gaia will continue. If we have 200 or 300 or 400, because there are 440 nuclear power plants around the world, with several more in construction now as we speak, if a dozen of those or 2 dozen or 5 dozen or 200 of those go off and it ionizes the atmosphere, it could easily take Earth not just 10 million years, which is the norm after a great extinction, to recover. It could take 20 or 30 million years. But the likelihood of Earth recovering, Gaia recovering, and life being fecund and abundant and consciousness continuing to evolve and transform certainly is there. So my wish is not to speed it up, not to stop it. It seems to me way out of our control to do any of that at this point. It's to collapse with as much dignity, as much heart, as much compassion, as much generosity. And for me, this is sort of my feeling of my calling. Actually, I had one colleague say, Michael, I think that you are the Fred Rogers for the end times. And I thought, okay, I can step into that. That's pretty fun.
You absolutely
mythic,
are.
you know.
Yeah.
But I think that what I wish is that millions and billions of people can come to see what's unfolding, at least understand enough of why it's unfolding to go, oh God, of course, of course, of course. So they give up the bitterness and the hatred and the fear and the judgment and the toxicity of their own thinking about it, and truly come to a place of global hospice where we support each other in this collapse, recognizing that, yes, this could absolutely be a transformation and there could be a continuation of even our species into the future. We just don't know. And so people like yourself who do believe that, man, I'm just a bow of respect. Go for it. You know, if that particular vision doesn't inspire me, but could be, I'd be arrogant for me to say it's not going to be the case. But I do believe it is possible that we can support each other in the age of great dying, in an age of collapse, such that the greatness of our species, the true spiritual and ecological greatness of our species, does experience a resurgence, a renaissance, a rekindling, and that if any of us survive, there are mythic stories told about this process or this timing.
I like to say what we're trying to create with our group and organization, which I would like to talk about, because that is,
Sure.
There's two elements of that. There's
Okay.
there's going high and there's going low, and
Okay.
it's essentially prepare for collapse and hope for utopia, because what we're trying to create is a resilient network of interconnected communities of people who recognize what is happening and what its causes are, and that it's the existing system, and that Bitcoin and going to space and business as usual, running the transition to renewable energies is not going to bring about a shift. But we can create our own alternative society and economic model and system that we support each other through whatever happens. And I have a great optimism in connecting with the people that I've recently been connecting with over the past several years, in finally coming out into this place of putting my heart forward and going out there and saying crazy things on the internet and connecting with people and finding that it's not so crazy after all, and that there are people out there with designs and technologies that are truly working to not manipulate, but to emulate nature. Biotechnologies, like I saw someone post the other day that renewable energy or solar energy will never be sustainable, and I just responded, well, you can actually make solar panels out of algae and recycled material. You can 3D print things out of trash. You can use coconuts coconut shells to create batteries. And there's this whole, as Buckminster Fuller called it, is a design science revolution that's happening, that's bringing our technology, finally bringing it over this clunky, adolescent, shitty, pubescent mustache phase of destroying the world to make itself, into creating legitimately regenerative materials. You can make from the hemp plant, for example, which, and I'm not going to say hemp is the one shot, but there are plants like hemp that you can produce any material from silk to steel rebar to graphene, which is a material that's used in processing and computing regeneratively. It's a fast growing plant. It heals soil. It pulls heavy metals and toxins out of the soil. It grows very quickly. You can grow a ton of it. You can do it in a syntropic way, which is like a large scale permaculture, like people are doing in South America. So there are regenerative ways for us to even increase our capacity of life, for us to create systems that implement automation, or even simple machines to reduce the amount of labor that it takes for us to do what we do, and not just on this top-down, nightmarish, dystopian way, in a way that is solar punk, in a way that the people create ourselves and control, and know how to replicate and understand.
Yeah, let me just jump in real quick because I'm so grateful. First of all, in my world, there are three things that are truly paramount, that are of the most importance. One is limiting, having enough millions of people accept that things are collapsing so that we do the work of limiting our geological scale toxicity. So doing everything we can to limit the number of nuclear meltdowns, the kinds of toxic, the fact that the seas, the oceans will continue to rise at least 25 to 40 feet over the next 200 years, no matter what. Absolutely, no matter what. That's an absolute
Surf's up, motherfuckers.
Yeah. So we need to move our shit away from the oceans, because otherwise it's going to seriously toxify the oceans even more. So that kind of thing, limiting our geological scale toxicity, assisting other species, such as trees, in migrating faster than any other animal can move their seeds. So assisting in helping some species, as many as possible, pass through this bottleneck. And the third thing is everything you just articulated, which is all of the regenerative, restorative, ecologically ground, moneyless economy kinds of stuff, all the ways of being human with each other and with the land in a way that is truly grounded in our best ecological, what I call eco-theology, but our best ecological relationship to the living world as a greater thou, not a lesser it. And I think that's holy work, whether there are millions of humans 50 years from now, or whether there's no humans 50 years from now. Those three things are holy, holy work, no matter what.
So I see, I genuinely can see a world where we can pull this off. I mean, it's crazy to think about it, but I think about all those problems like ocean acidification and melting of the ice and those things. These are physics problems. There are solutions to them. I don't know what they are. I can't say that. But
you will hold that until you read the book that I've already recommended to you, that you clearly haven't read yet, which is William Catton's book, Overshoot, The Ecological Basis of Revolutionary Change.
I ordered it last night, actually.
That's great, because
when you read that book, I'm a slow reader. I will read it.
Well, that's okay. I've recorded the audio of the whole thing. I mean, I've listened to it a dozen times.
Oh, I would much rather listen to you.
Great. That's great. The reason that book is why so many of us consider that book the most important book we've personally ever read, and probably the most important book of the 20th century, is because one of the main distinctions is the distinction between predicaments, which can't be solved. They can't be fixed. We have to adapt to them and live with them, such as death. Death is not a problem to be solved. It's a predicament that we have to adapt to and ultimately die with. And problems and fixes. And I'm about as phobic of the word fix or solution as a person can possibly get. So when you mention that there are solutions for this and that, I just turn off. It's like, okay, whatever. He doesn't get ecological overshoot.
Well, so I do get an ecological overshoot. I understand the problems that we're going through, the predicaments that we're in, many of which are not, I mean, we are in a changed climate, not a changing climate. And what I would hope all peoples step into is not a dogmatic paradigm of we need to do this, 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 and that. It is a train of thought, and it is a mode of adaptation to what we're going through. But I see the wild card in all of this is the collective conscious, and you can talk about this big we coming down through this top down thing. I don't see that really happening. What I see happening and what I can do in my immediate mile is to speak this truth and connect with other people and create community and create dialogue and work together to create an open source society, to create a society where we are sharing our information and we are moving away from this competing mentality. If the nations of the world did at some point say, okay, we need to work together instead of like the United States competing against China to stop them from creating nuclear fusion or all these technologies, to say we can't let them get this. This is how our technology is created, how corporations are controlling the development of technology and of science. They're totally controlling it. And this force of science and technology, which is not just in terms of making machines and things like that, but the ecological understanding of what we can do to remunerate, through regenerative agriculture, through other, like I have so many friends who are healing ecosystems right now. And I have a friend in one of our groups who's very, he's down the doom train. And, he speaks in a lot of absolutes. And I would consider, the antecedent or the opposite of the hopium is a kind of intellectual heroin in a doom mentality that's just perpetually set in saying no and in talking shit. And I meet a lot of people on Twitter that are in this doom mentality. They're not like you. They're not kind and gracious and open and patient and actually willing to listen to other things. They spend their time attacking other people trying to make a difference, which is a very toxic, sad thing. And I think what it is a defense mechanism, because it is easier for them to accept, okay, there's nothing I can do. This is it. There's then it is to say, okay, there are things we can do and must do. And my perspective to that is always, if you see this certainty of this calamity, then you have an absolutely dire responsibility, not just to prep and get your little bunker filled with dried beans, but it's to help the vulnerable people in this world adapt to what is going to happen. If you are certain that the world is going to end and that everything's going to collapse in this horrendous way, then you have a fucking responsibility to use your knowledge and privilege, which knowledge is the ultimate privilege, to do everything that you can to make a resilient culture and movement to help those people through it, whatever it is that happens. And that is my perspective, that I can't say for sure that we're going to be living in the Venus Project in these circular cities and we're going to, in a positive way, cannibalize this cannibalistic civilization and recycle it into something that is efficient and works and is beautiful and is continually increasing itself and working to regenerate the earth and undoing so much of the work that we're doing and creating public transportation and energy systems, because there's a million ways to make energy. There's a million ways to get around. There's ways to do all these things in ways that can help the earth, not destroy it. But the big point of contention that I have is that faith in the almighty we, or whatever it is that you said. I do believe that no matter what happens, people coming together and responding, not reacting, can make a tremendous difference. And as there have been apocalyptic events before, we're going through this again. And I see I was obsessed as a child with the Middle Ages, and so I've read a ton about the Black Plague, which was an apocalyptic event, killed half the people, and then the peasants, Jason Hickel's book Less is More had a great section about this, and a great section about animism and about the shift from the monotheistic religions, or shift away from religions that worship nature and hold it as sacred, to basically adapting to this view that life is sin and misery and death, and nature should be controlled and it's poisonous and it fucks too much, and all this which is a justification for an exploitative system that needs to expand constantly. It's a beautiful book by Jason Hickel. But
I'm quite familiar with it.
After the Black Plague, things improved for the peasants.
Yeah, but it did so within the stability of the Holocene. It did so without the oceans becoming and the rivers becoming anoxic and exhibiting and expressing fumes that we mammals can't survive with. Hydrogen sulfide, things like that. The stability that allowed for whatever catastrophes and apocalypses have occurred over the last 7,000 years, and there have been lots of them, it always happened within the context of a stability of the Holocene climatic stability. And we could continue growing food. We could continue living. We are likely, in my mind, inevitably beyond that maintaining. And yet, there are no group of people on the planet that I am more of a full-hearted, big-hearted, full-throated amen and wishing that you to do the best, is that people that hold your values, your worldview, and I wouldn't call it hopium. I mean, for me to hold your worldview for myself would be hopium, what I'm defining as hopium. But it's more likely to come true, even if it's a 1% chance or a 2% chance or a 5% chance. It's more likely if millions of people hold the perspective that you're articulating. So I'm just a bow of respect to it, even though I don't hold it. But what I am trying to do is ensure that we, as Joanna Macy and I talked about a year and a half ago, collapse well, collapse with dignity, and do so in ways that plant seeds for healthy culture, healthy, non-monetary ways of doing exchange, and ecologically sane and truly indigenuity, that getting back to that indigenous heart and mind and values and actions. It's the only way into the future. And again, that's true whether we go extinct in 50 years or not.
I agree. And when you say, collapse gently, I think about that book, Ecotopia, which I found in
I read that decades ago. Sure.
Which I found in an old senior center thrift store, and it was all dog-eared and moth-eaten. And I just love that book because he talks about the survival economy, where they intentionally crash the economy, and then work together to meet all people's needs. Go ahead.
Though there's one of, I mean, like I'm trying to think, okay, is there anything that I really think is important that I haven't yet articulated? And the one thing is that I would say the main focus of I'm an independent scholar. That's just what I do. When I become passionate about something, I spend 20 to 50 hours a week studying it for like years, usually, to try to become the best I can be in articulating it and understanding it. And the two things that I've studied most in the last 9 years, one of them is the ecological paradigm that William Catton and many others have provided, but Catton's the foundation for virtually all of us, his book Overshoot. The other is the rise and fall of civilizations, and what have we learned by those historians that set cultures side by side, civilizations, and then notice the common patterns of progress and then the common patterns of regress, of collapse. And one of the most common patterns, and I learned this first from John Michael Greer, and then it was validated by others, Toynbee and Spengler and others who are full-time historians, but Greer is a phenomenal. I think I've read 14 or 15 of his books. I've recorded 9 of them. I just love John Michael Greer's stuff. But one of the most common patterns is that in civilizational collapse and the collapse of empires, that we have lots of evidence, those cultures that were literate, we have a lot of written evidence about how people thought and felt and believed and whatever. One of the most common beliefs is transformation, that we can truly transform things. And it's the most common pattern of people that aren't in full-blown denial, or there's 3 categories of people that most people fall into in collapsing societies. One is, it ain't happening. Just full-scale denial. The other is, it's happening, but it's the end of the fucking world. It's total apocalypse, That belief actually didn't exist until 3,200 years ago, but in the last 3,200 years, it's been present in most collapsing civilizations and empires. And the third is those who genuinely believe and work for some kind of transformation at some scale. And they're often successful at some scale. It never saves the society from collapse. And it never transforms the political, economic, and social structures prior to collapse, but it often does plant seeds of healthy culture on the other side of collapse. And I think that's what I'm hearing, and that's what others of my friends and colleagues that are in a very much of a still genuinely committed to true transformation, consciousness, spiritual, economic, ecological transformation. I think we are planting seeds, and I think that that's to be celebrated and encouraged in every possible way, even though there's some that are in my camp, which are, there's a 90%, maybe 95% chance that we are completely toast, not just we humans, but virtually all mammals, other than a small burrowing animal. And so then how do we be with each other? And how do we assure as little geological scale toxicity and ensure that as many, or at least increase the odds of as many other species making this bottleneck? In other words, how can we attend to our legacy as humans in the most, in my Christian, Christ-like, but what I mean by that is pro-future, heartful, compassionate, generous ways possible.
Sorry, I gotta tell you a little window into how my mind works.
Okay.
When you talked about that little ground animal, I just got like a very vivid, very like whole vision of like a short story or a character in a larger thing that is this little ground marmot that was like genetically engineered, and then the consciousness of Michael Dowd was put into it. And so I play Dungeons and Dragons in this post-apocalyptic world called the Fourth World.
Right.
And I just imagine like that's a character, that's encounter, like a little mystic sage that like comes out of the ground, is like, well, let me tell you about there's been 4 worlds before this. They all fucked up. They destroyed themselves pointlessly.
Oh God,
that's just
that's
how
great. Well,
think.
thank you for sharing that. And one of the things, because I really do respect you and I admire where you're coming from, and I especially align with your heart and values, that I would welcome.
Michael, that means a lot. It really does. I really appreciate your appreciation.
Thanks. Well, if you do take the time to like carefully read and mark up and maybe listen to, because what I would encourage you to do is to actually get a paperback copy of Overshoot, but listen to my audio version. Because the nice thing about my audio narration of it, first of all, I got the publisher's permission. Catton had just died, so I couldn't get his permission. But when I'm moved to tears, as I am a couple of times in that book by William Catton's generosity of soul, you can hear it. Microphone going. I mean, you can hear me crying. You can hear Connie crying on the couch. It's like, and those paragraphs, probably 36 times throughout the book, I'll say, now that paragraph was so good, I'm going to read it again. And so it alerts the audio listener, hey, wake up, make sure you pay attention here. So if you do take the time to read that, I'd love to schedule another conversation with you and just lean into what and how that book might have made a difference and how it's enriched your own worldview. I don't care if you agree with me. I'm a celebration of who you are and what you're doing and the path you're on, independent of anything that I'm thinking or feeling. But I want to stay in communication with you as a friend and colleague.
Of course. And I do agree with you, in a big way. That doesn't mean I agree with every single thing that you're saying or every piece of it, but we agree. And this is an interesting thing I find with most people, period, even the atheists and the Christians, there's I have this hard to articulate thought that like we all, not that we all agree, but there is a point of agreement for all people if we can communicate enough. So the atheists and the Christians, I think that, like there is an undeniable God. There is an undeniable pattern in the fabric of reality that somebody from a spiritual perspective and somebody from a totally atheistic perspective. I mean, there's people out there that are going to say, oh, the universe is all random, and everything is matter's all that exists. But then you have the quantum physicists that are further to the left on the spiritual spectrum than a lot of the Christians, that are saying absolutely that's untrue. There is this reality is holographic. It's not really what we think it is. There's no such thing as solidity. It's all spirit. It's all information. And there are holographic, holocratic patterns that uplift individual creations that are a part of a whole. That I agree with you. Most of what you say. I think I would say that I think for a lot of people discovering you, you'd be a bad influence for a lot of people I know.
Because keep them away from me. Don't publish this interview.
Because it would unduly feed a sense of pessimism and a sense of a lack of action instead of where when I read that things are collapsing, it's like act no matter what. My friend Alan Chornak, one of my best friends, the pessimistic environmentalist, who you'd love this guy. He's in my movie. And he's just like this fiery communicator. He's so pissed off because he's as a wildlife biologist and he's watching life die all around him. He's been talking about climate change since he's like 12 years old. And his perspective is we're going down swinging, that no matter what happens, we have to do the best that we can. We have to create this, as you said, a renaissance of a beautiful, renewed humanity, of restoring the sense of who and what we are, that we are not a parasite. That with it, that humans organizing in complex society is not in and of itself. What we call civilization today, absolutely cancerous, absolutely destructive. Right. But human beings, as David Graeber's last book so beautifully points out, have organized themselves into so many different forms and structures, and many of them were large and complex. Many of them were urban. Many of them had, what we would consider, a complex civilizational apparatus that did not end up this way. And that it's not something that we're not inherently fated when we organize above certain groups and sizes to just fuck ourselves over and destroy ourselves. And all this cycle of all this horrible development has, in its own strange way, given us the tools to finally and perfectly manage and economize our society with the use of technology, with the use of humans, to allow us to create systems that allow us true participation and truly holocratic decision-making systems where the individual is not smashed by some bureaucracy and the collective is not foregone for the enrichment of an individual. We can create systems that by design work as nature does, that does not allow one organism to suck up 90% of the resources.
No, exactly. Well, just to be clear, and yeah, I appreciate you saying that, some of the people in my circle, you'd be a bad influence on. What I do know is that my wife uses an analogy of an arm like this, that if you're up here and you genuinely believe that enough people have a shift in heart and consciousness and intention of commitment, whatever, you're going to really resent anybody down here saying it's too late for that. You're not going to be able to accept that. I'm a religious naturalist. I have no otherworldly or supernatural beliefs whatsoever. I'm an eco-theologian and a religious naturalist. And to my mind, a person's God is their ultimate concern. Whatever is their ultimate concern is their God. And if the market is your ultimate concern, if human technology and human, whatever, then that's your God. So for me, having anything less than the biosphere, the cosmos, as your ultimate concern is a ecocidal notion of God, of the divine.
And so it's a limitation on what we are, to say that we are anything less than everything, that we can be confined to our own personal success, that that's any measure of success, that it has to come at the expense of other people, that I'll never be happy. Truly, I mean, I'm happy every day, but I'll never be content with the state of the world when I know that, the majority of the world lives on less than $2 a day on that bullshit metric. When I know that a child dies of hunger every 5 seconds, when I know that even if the ecosystem wasn't collapsing on itself, that this would be no way to live, that this is an unacceptable form of inhumanity, that we have created this society that, only exists because you have to stand up on somebody else's face and push them down and drown them so that you can stand up. That's not acceptable, no matter what's happening in the rest of the world.
I get it, and I align with that.
Nature is forcing us into an evolution, an adaptation, a fundamentally changed sense of who and what we are. And I embrace that change, and I am hopeful. I have hope, and people tell me that all the time, that and I pour it out, and I'm not hopeful all the time in my daily life. When I'm walking through the aisles of Walmart to find a dongle so that I can connect one cord to another cord, I'm not hopeful in that moment.
No, but I get it. Yeah, I don't even find the word hopeful or hopeless useful anymore. I truly align with Stephen Jenkinson, who says that, to reject the false dichotomy of being hopeful or hopeless, that they're both a part of the same delusion, basically, that I live in a place that's hope-free. And I am passionately engaged. I am compassionately engaged. I want to make the biggest difference that I can and reduce as much suffering as I can. And I love connecting with friends and colleagues like you and many others. That's why virtually everything that I've done that I consider of any value in the last 5 years exists on or linked to the postdoom.com website. There's 3 main pages on postdoom.com. There's the 85 conversations. There's the weekly and biweekly discussions where we support each other on a weekly, biweekly basis, like how to stay present, how to stay heartful, how to do good work. And then there's the resources, which are all the audio, text, and videos and documentaries and podcasts, like all the best of the best stuff that I'm aware of and that anybody else that lets me know of, aware of in this post-doom, which is not the same thing as doom. Unfortunately, you can't get to post-doom without at least going through a little bit of doom. So anybody that's listening to this or watching this that has any curiosity about where I'm coming from, you'll find everything that of value on the postdoom.com website.
Yeah, and I would just say, to harmonize with that, any conversation that I've ever watched of you is just full of value, of human value and of compassion and patience and acceptance and understanding and love. And that is really something that is so important. And I would say, to people in your community, we need to organize outside of this structure. I mean, it's not enough to say, okay, the old thing is dying, but I'm still going to keep going to my job and doing this and living in this box house. We can and must create an alternative, resilient community, because, as you said earlier before we started recording, or maybe you said that, it's a privilege right now to be able to go to the grocery store and put gas in the car that will not exist much longer. And the working class of this world are not living they're living in collapse conditions. Every day, a little piece of their stability crumbles away. And so we need to organize together and create alternative systems. And we can do it in a way that is infectious, that spreads wildly, that shows people a better way to live, a more equal way to live, that we can live in communities where we all have a nice high quality standard of living that is sustainably created. We can have fucking natural swimming pools, and we can have media labs, and places where people can utilize the fruits of this civilizational thing, like the internet, like screens and ability to connect, and microphones and cameras, and all these things that allow us to spread our message and to live at a high standard. We can have those things at a scaled at a healthy pace, at a scale. One of my friends at the Aravana project, they're working with an indigenous community to design them like this circular, very futuristic circular city. And there's a beautiful closing of that loop of the indigenous with the civilized, where we're coming full circle. We're spiraling around into something truly new that takes what we have learned from this, instead of being like angry at technology and all these things, to say, okay, we actually have new tools. And I don't think that that our ancestors, if they could see that we had the ability to lessen suffering greatly, and we didn't, I think they would consider that obscene privilege. But so I just invite anybody in this mentality that understands this system's going down. Okay, we have an obligation, a moral obligation, and just a pure survival obligation to come together in more egalitarian structures, in more resilient forms, share our knowledge, share our information, share our wealth. Don't just go into the bunker alone. That's going to be really a miserable life.
Yes,
even if you do have all the beans you can eat for 50 years,
right,
while the bombs
exactly.
go off in the distance.
Exactly. Yeah, I was telling somebody the other day that they were talking about, should I prepare? Should I stockpile? Should I get a gun or whatever? And I said, I was a sharpshooter in the military. I'm a kick-ass, marksman. I can use lots of different weapons. I don't have a weapon. I would rather die with my neighbors than protect my shit from my neighbors. Thank you very much. And while I don't share any of the optimistic stuff that you articulated in the last 4 or 5 minutes, I'm a deep and profound amen to the fact that there are people like you and pursuing that with as much passion as you can.
Well, we can create microtopia for us and our communities and our neighbors. So if we and our neighbors come together, we can create a much better and more sustainable system.
Exactly.
And connect it globally.
And doing that, well, that's the piece that I may not share your optimism by, but nonetheless, having that heart, having that intention, having those values, doing that with as much passion and integrity and commitment as we can, at a scale that we can genuinely do it, is holy work. And I say, go for it. Absolutely. I'm doing that my own way here. It's just that I don't share sort of some of the optimism that what's possible at the we level, but that's okay. But our differences are more interesting.
Is an expanding thing. It starts with you and me. It starts with two people. I had this dream years ago about an application, about a way to network people that starts by looking for one person or connecting two people that are very similar. Instead of us having to go through all the manual work of finding each other and connecting, even though we agree and align so much, we have algorithms which are currently used to, take our hopes and dreams and turn them into targeted ads. These learning machines study the way we use language, the way we communicate, connect us with people that are like us. That's two people. That's we. And then it works to connect with other people and form into a little community. And then it zooms out and it sees that community as an individual, and it analyzes it in the same way. And it works to connect that community with another community and another community. And this is the way that the council structures in Rojava and other places around the world that have alternative systems, they organize themselves in this way, and it scales upward, and it can scale to a much larger scale without abusive political authority, that allows us to connect, that allows us to share information, that allows us to be resilient and share what we have. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to create, is a network of communities that are able to abundantly produce what they need and to distribute in a network, not in a market, that surplus that we have, to basically be our own parallel society that is interdependent and self-dependent or independent of this existing cancerous parasitic apparatus. And I think that is something that is absolutely essential for us to build.
Yeah, well, I'm an amen to that impulse and that desire, and I hope you're right, because I'd love my granddaughter, who's 2 years old, that lives 2 blocks away, to be able to live in that kind of a world. Even though I personally think that there's probably a more likelihood that there will be no humans 20 years from now.
20 years?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think things are going to spin out that rapidly, that there will probably be, I'd put it at 80% chance that there'll be no humans at all by 2040.
Well, maybe in 2041 we can reconvene.
I'd love to. Believe me, I'd love to be wrong, brother.
Well, I really appreciate this. I appreciate talking to you, and I would love to continue it. I'm
Cool.
in this not to form little transactional shows and do things with people. I'm in this to form relationships.
Yeah, exactly.
With people of all walks, and to grow with them. And I seek out those people that I really respect and have a lot to learn from and have a lot to share with. And that's what keeps me going on a daily basis. I'm trying to socialize my way out of whatever personal apocalypse there is. And if that isn't as infectious as I hope it is, and if we can create structures and formulate a larger we, then it will spread large enough that we make a larger difference.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm committed to staying in good, collegial, loving relationship with you.
Well, I just so appreciate it, man. Take it easy, and have a little hope. Give into a little bit of hope every now and then.
I find
hope is a beautiful thing.
I find living hope free to be way more soul nourishing than hopeful.
Even if your hope is that, I don't know, I hope is like, for me, it's like tuning my consciousness to the little beams of light like this of synchronicity, that I'm open to miraculous things happening everywhere, even in the Walmart, and they happen everywhere. I don't know if you maybe you have a different wording, and that's the trickiness of language, that all our words mean different things to you and I. But for me, that's what hope is. Yeah, and hope is this fire, this fuel, this very clean energy source that allows me to
I hold it differently, but there's certainly a common green heart that I think I share with you. And the colleague of mine that I feel most closely aligned with, probably more than anybody else, really two. One is Margaret Wheatley, Meg Wheatley. There are two post-Doom conversations with Margaret Wheatley, neither of which I had. One of them was Terry Patton, who just died about less than a year ago, just dear, long-term friend and colleague. What a spiritual brother. And then the other one with Michael Shaw, only a few months ago. And so my two conversations with Meg Wheatley are really, really lean into sort of this conversation where you and I are now in terms of hope and that sort of thing. So anyway.
I'll check it out.
Great. Thanks, brother.
Well, yeah, I appreciate you, Michael. We'll keep in touch.
Sounds great.
See you on the wide web.
All right. Yeah. Bye-bye.
See you in the end of times.
Yeah. Right. Okay.